Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Department of Medicine Grand Rounds. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping tips. Please make sure your video is off at this time and your mics are muted. Also, we ask that you hold your questions and comments till the end, at which time you may unmute yourself or use the chat box for questions. Lastly, the CME information will be displayed during the presentation, and I will also periodically place it in the chat box. Today, our speaker is Dr. Sherry Shu Sing Huang. Joining us from Rutgers Biomedical and Health Sciences for a presentation on healthcare in 2025. Dr. Huang is Professor of Pediatrics at Robert Wood Johnson and Vice Chancellor and the enterprise-wide designated institutional official for GME at RBHS. She also chairs the Rutgers Health GME Committee and is integrally involved in all critical aspects of the integration of the Rutgers and Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health GME programs. Prior to her career in graduate medical education, Dr. Huang graduated Phi Lambda Epsilon from MIT and received her MD from Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. She went on to complete residency in pediatrics and fellowship training at UCSD in pediatric gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition. She spent much of her career there as faculty for the pediatric residency and fellowship programs and as the chair of GME. Dr. Huang is an accomplished researcher and has published many manuscripts and book chapters in her field. She's currently involved in several NIH grant-supported translational research projects looking at pediatric colon cancer and early risk colon cancer. We welcome you and thank you, Dr. Huang, for joining us today to give us this presentation on healthcare in 2025.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Dana, and especially to Dr. Klappholz for this lovely honor to share at the Internal Medicine Grand Rounds at NJMS. Actually, today is a very special day for me. I didn't realize until I woke up this morning that today is my 1-year anniversary for joining the Rutgers organization. So I'm very proud to be here and very happy every day to be part of this giant learning organization. And so today I really wanted to focus some of the ideas that I have been thinking about for Rutgers Health and the graduate medical education space that we all live and learn in, and what this means for not just our learners, but also ourselves and our patients. So here is the CME information for everyone to see, and I will also show it at the very end of the talk. Most of my talk comes from a walking tour or maybe a flying tour that the ACGME completed in 2016. And I need to explain that I am now a member of the ACGME Clinical Learning Environment Committee as a volunteer member, but I have no financial conflicts for this talk, except that I love babies and children and I like to care for them. So this walking tour convened in 2016, and this group of collected faculty, DIOs, ACGME task force members went through the United States for about 9 months in a variety of small and large settings, looking at communication and interviews with different stakeholders. And with their findings, they published this in the ACGME journal. I believe it was 2018-19. And it was like a nearly 200-page manifesto of what they believed that the educational space looked like at the moment that they published and what the educational space needed to develop and grow into. However, something happened in the middle of that and COVID pandemic occurred. And so what I have done is use the findings from the ACGME sponsoring institution project called ACGME SI 2025 and talk about the contextual forces that they described was really prominent throughout our learning environment, and then integrate some of the issues that have occurred as a result of the pandemic into the way we have to model, flex, and improve the way we teach our learners in the current space. The ACGME identified 8 themes, and every time that I put a little push pin, this is a reminder that we as a GME community need to plan for this. And if I show a little coronavirus, that is to indicate that what the ACGME anticipated has already taken off as a result of the pandemic. I will not have time to talk about every single theme and changes suggested, mostly because number 5 and number 7 will take an entire hour into itself. And we have some exciting things that are happening, especially in the area of evolving the role of the allied health professional. So we'll have to save that for another day. But these are the 6 of the 8 themes that we will be going through. And I really hope to take you along this fun journey of where we are right now in GME and what we need to do to prepare ourselves. I do want to let you know that I live right across the street from the train station. So sometimes the trains whip by and my sound may be a little altered as a result. So the original walking tour that the ACGME did recognized 3 very major driving forces that was pushing change in medical education. And these words, I have trouble saying because it's not part of our common vernacular in medicine. And those are the areas of rapid democratization, increasing commoditization, and the way corporatization is being advanced throughout the medical system. And then overlaying all of this now, we have to be mindful that our world view has changed. Our entire community of medical practice has changed as a result of the pandemic. So what are some of these driving forces? So going back, I will always talk about what the ACGME found in 2016-17 and then what the recommendations are for 2025. So democratization is really just the act of making something available to as many people as possible and teaching them how to understand it. And in this particular theme, we're talking about medical knowledge and the access, not just of us having medical knowledge, but also our patients. And we started to see in the in 2016-17 that the internet was becoming a very powerful tool. Dr. Google was a friend and a foe to us as providers. And that we were seeing, regardless of how correct or incorrect the tools were, our patients were using it to guide their own decision care making. And I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. But how the internet and how these tools have allowed patients to understand their disease process, at the same time, it has helped us as providers create better treatment plans that fit better with our patients' situation. This has also allowed us to facilitate major protocols in facilitating improved healthcare and also help patients understand their medical diseases and provide better healthcare for themselves. We do see that as a result of the pandemic, patients have increasing control over their decision-making and over their acquisition of knowledge. Whether they understand and incorporate that knowledge appropriately, is something that we have to help monitor. What democratization means in 2025, which if we realize is only 3 small years away, is that the differential access to data and information becomes even more split, that certain groups will have better access and certain groups will have better proficiency. So now we also have to manage how our patients are having access, gaining access to the data, and how they're incorporating and understanding the knowledge that they're gaining. And this becomes quite challenging, especially in a mixed geographic and socioeconomic population that we care for here in New Jersey. Patients are becoming increasingly proficient, whether we're ready for it or not, and making independent, hard inquiries into the way they manage their encounter with us, either as a single provider or as a health system. They're also using this health information that they're gaining to guide the timing of care, sometimes for the better and sometimes to the detriment of their care. So as physicians and as providers that teach our learners, we need to keep up with this pace of new knowledge. And it's no longer just learning new science, but it's also learning new technology that very few of us were trained to learn or acquire from our college and medical school days. It is important for us to stay on top of this because we have a responsibility to help navigate this information for our patients and to help them address some of the complexities of their care. Commoditization is the second major force. And what this really means is healthcare services that have become standardized and automated. I recall early in my faculty days when we started to have protocols for asthma, and I started to feel a certain loss of control over an asthma protocol set that would automatically appear up in Epic. So we're starting to see that not only is this being standardized, but it's also being automated and taken out of the normal hospital setting, where now the things that we used to do in our clinical setting may be done at an outpatient. And I think the COVID pandemic surely showed that testing for COVID and vaccinations can be done efficiently and effectively outside of the normal hospital setting. We're also becoming more flexible in our understanding of risk and the way we do care. For one example, cataract surgery used to occur only one eye at a time. And now the evidence has shown that it is safe actually for a patient to have simultaneous cataract surgeries for both eyes. And so that this allows a better length of stay for the patients. It improves the outcomes because they have the same set of providers doing the type of surgery on both eyes, and allows them to heal faster and get back to their way of life. In 2025, what commoditization really means is something that very few of us, I would venture to guess, quite understand. Bundling of care is what our insurance companies and CMS are expecting that we as a healthcare organization begin to understand, not only as providers, but to teach it. For example, in the past, if I needed a hip replacement, I might have a care plan for my orthopedic surgeon, for the anesthesiologist, for the PT that would occur in-house, and the rehab that would occur outside. Now, what we're seeing is that insurance companies and CMS expect that if a patient comes in for a hip replacement, it's a one-stop shopping, and the payment needs to cover all the providers, all the settings in one situation. And therefore, it forces the healthcare system to understand and allocate that care efficiently and effectively to provide the best outcome, and also to be the most financially efficient for the health system. The commoditization effort has allowed us to look at providers that are not classically MDs or DOs, and to continue with that healthcare. Perhaps a post-op visit will be provided by allied health professional, a doctoral APN, versus the entire team, in an effort to free up the team to do more advanced care and to do the regular routine follow-up care by a non-physician provider. However, this forces us to remind ourselves that the physician needs to oversee the entire organization of that particular environment from a quality and patient safety standpoint, and also an advocacy standpoint for the patient. So we as providers and as teachers for our learners need to not only learn this and spell it, I have a hard time saying it and spelling it, but also to ensure that we coordinate the care in an effective way. And how technology use is used to support this will be addressed in a future slide. And I think the final theme that the ACGME Walking Tour noticed was that the idea of corporatization. This is defined as subjected to corporate ownership and control. And in 2016, the ACGME group saw that there was ongoing active consolidation of healthcare services and facilities under one name. Dignity Health, for example, is one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States and spans many systems and many states. We at Rutgers Health, with our relationship with the University Hospital in Newark, as well as Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health, are an example of a successful consolidation of large systems that came together to improve healthcare and improve teaching. So the practice of medicine already was moving away from individual groups and into large corporate settings. And as a result, as a secondary result or unanticipated result, really altered the way we look at medical education. We were also seeing early in 2016 that our learners were joining corporate medicine as salaried employees and not necessarily as a private practice group. I have noticed that this is much more common in the West Coast than in the East Coast. And I'm starting to really understand the geography choices, the geographical settings that have influenced the choices of our learners. And we're starting to see that the reason why corporatization began to happen 5 years ago was really to stabilize best practices, revenue, and spread costs across a large system. And what 2025 means for us as graduate medical education teachers is that we will need to continue to promote our learners to be comfortable joining large systems, as many of us are part of large systems now, and we need to teach them to be proficient as we supervise them and coordinate them through this large system. We will be inundated with the expectation that we use large data sets to improve quality, and that we will need to also then be as efficient as possible in the largest interdisciplinary provider team as possible. And finally, that we are strategic in the things that we do and the missions that we set as a division, as a department, as a university. We are also seeing that corporatization has its negative side effects, and that rural areas, and we don't even have to be super rural in the state of New Jersey to see this effect. For example, Ocean County, some of the southern regions in New Jersey have less access to learners who might want to join this space. There are less options for rural care and less resources available. So we have to recognize that a large sponsoring institution like Rutgers needs to be mindful of the full access to healthcare in our state of New Jersey. Some of the proactive things we need to think about as educators in GME is how we teach teamwork, how we teach organization, how we teach leadership. Many of us were not taught any of these skill sets when we were developing as a young faculty, and therefore we as a GME community need to look for ways to streamline and fast track some of our young faculty and our more senior faculty as well to become competent leaders in this new organization that we're all learning in. There's a responsibility that the sponsoring institution and we at Rutgers, we're 135 ACGME programs large with over 1,600 learners. We're one of the largest SIs in the country from an ACGME standpoint. It's our responsibility then to work closely with the health system to make sure that the right investments in GME occur, and that we also work hard to retain our own students, learners, and graduates into our faculty system. We do need to be concerned that as we get lost in a large corporate system, that we continue to have the autonomy to provide care in the way that we believe and morally believe is the best way to take care of our patients. And then we do need to ensure that we keep a close commitment to the priorities set not only by our medical school, but also by our health system to make sure that we remain advocates for our patients. So I wanted to walk you through some of the fun themes that the ACGME noticed, and I think today we'll see a large separation between the silent generation. There may be some faculty that are part of the silent generation, our boomers, our Gen X's, and our millennials, and probably some iGen in our very young learners that are on the call. So the previous pre-pandemic view was that the changing healthcare needs included the recognition that we're using a lot of internet wearable portable devices. I bet all of us have had a Fitbit put on our hands or our wrists, as well as the iPhone watch, to capture the things that we think are important to capture. The projected view in 2025 is that folks will widely have access to medical information use, whether it's through the internet or through wearable devices that they have, and will come to you with the technology device for you to interpret, for you to help them make right choices. We need to know that these devices can improve healthcare delivery and literacy, has improved quality of life for some patients. This is a picture of the Freestyle Libre, which is a very painless way of capturing glucose monitoring for people who are insulin-dependent diabetics, and really allow patients to be advocates for their own care, et cetera. However, the space is moving too fast, and there's questions about validation and quality of the equipment that patients are having access to. I still struggle with the blood pressure monitor that goes around my pinky finger to really measure an appropriate blood pressure for me. And so we as physicians need to learn about these new digital markers. We need to learn how to accept them, how to take that data efficiently to integrate into our patients' healthcare story to improve their quality. And we need the health system then to help us build tools that will help integrate the right data into the space, and in an effort to improve care and reduce costs. We also know that part of the healthcare change is the recognition that we have an aging demographic. Our baby boomers in 2016 were already entering into the greater than 60-year population. But in 2025, and I forgot to mention that on the right side, I will always talk about the 2025 recommendations, we are seeing that all the baby boomers have entered the 60+ year population. Not only are our baby boomers turning 60, but we have to remember that this is the largest population of clinicians in the United States. And as such, we expect that this largest clinical population of providers has or will retire by 2025. Not only will our clinicians be retiring, but the general population of boomers will be retiring with more complex chronic diseases, made a little bit more complex with the coronavirus because of the inability or the fear of seeking care, with the recognition that the largest geriatric care population will be soon upon us, that we will need to navigate as providers. And I take us back to the very earliest mobile cellular phone, which used to be this big in the 70s and 80s. So it is our job then as GME teachers to really understand how to care for this aging population, how to incorporate the care that they may receive in the hospital, as well as at home or in a community-based hybrid model for our older patients. We saw that impaired mobility had a great consequence for this older population. And then in the age of coronavirus, that was enhanced and even more obvious to us as providers. We have to train ourselves and our learners to understand this population, to participate in the multidisciplinary provider group that is necessary to provide safe and effective geriatric care. And then we as an institution need to understand and envision what the long-term strategy for to provide the best mix of population for our largest population that will be challenged with access to care from a mobility standpoint. The next generation that currently lives in the healthcare system as providers and patients is Gen X. The Gen X patients are between ages 45 and 60. It is still unclear how deeply entrenched the behaviors of Gen X will alter or affect the healthcare system. And this is a group that is very comfortable with high-tech care, was not born with a cell phone in their hand like our iGen patients, our own children, but are consumers of high-tech information and product. And I just wanted to show you the very, very first PDA smartphone was created in 1998. It was called the NeoPoint 1000, and it was carried by Sprint. And I'm bragging about this because this is the very first PDA phone that my husband's startup created. It is no longer in existence because they couldn't stay abreast with the time. But even in 1998, as we were just beginning to enter the technology field, we already had smartphones ready to go. And the Gen X population will now begin to enter their 60-year-old space in 2025 and will add to the ongoing pressures of providing geriatric care. This is also the generation that we will expect to build up as leaders. And therefore, we as GME leaders will need to think about the ongoing professional development that our young faculty will need, who are going to be entering the leadership population very soon. And then finally, in the clinical healthcare arena, our millennials need to be shouted out about. The millennials are becoming independent healthcare consumers. They're starting to age to the point where they have medical diseases that need help with. And in 2025, they will be in the area of 25 to 45-year-olds, not only accounting for the majority of the US workforce, but also the majority of the healthcare professionals entering active practice. So we as medical education folks need to be absolutely prepared for this very diverse group of learners. They're very computer and tech aware. They're very adaptive, and their skills for managing the internet and technology is really unprecedented. Probably the only group better than them are our children, the iGen group, who will soon become residents in our program very soon. And so we as a health system need to adjust to the behavior of millennials. And those of you who have done generation talks know that the millennial generation is one of the first generations to really value convenience and don't mind shopping around either for jobs or for healthcare as well. They may mix and match the providers that they get and customize their care to the extent of going to different systems. So we need to adapt to that as providers and also as employers for the healthcare professionals that are coming in as the major providers in 2025. Another area of need that is part of the changing healthcare platform is racial and ethnic diversity. We all know that US has become more diverse every single year, and where we practice in New York, we recognize that New York is one of the most diverse cities in America. So we as GME learners and teachers need to recognize that in 2025, the expectation of racial and ethnic growth in our cities, in our clinical space, will continue to grow. We need to understand as providers and as teachers how to educate our learners to provide care in a culturally diverse arena, recognizing that different social values, different social pressures and realities coming from our patients and families may dictate care in the end. And therefore, we need to recognize this, teach it, and more importantly, recruit diverse clinicians who can really understand and advance this area to provide better culturally competent care in our own space, as well as teach it to our learners coming in. We also know that the changing healthcare needs reflect not only in their patients, but also in their providers. The way the patients looked at their physicians in the past was as their primary point of contact. They had a deep relationship with their patient providers and often did not change the providers over the course of their lifetime. They relied on their providers as the primary point of contact and the person that they would go for anything that they had concern about. What we're seeing in 2025 is that the patients continue to have meaningful contact with their providers, but that responsibility of doing in-depth one-on-one care has shifted, not only as a result of the improvement in technology, but the expectation from the ACGME that we move towards a team-based model that allows big data to interface as part of the team. And we saw this first and foremost with the coronavirus pandemic, and know that telehealth has really become a model of providing care for our patients, and therefore that one-on-one in-person contact has been diluted somewhat. We recognize from the ACGME that the way we approach team-based care will need to be a hallmark of GME teaching in 2025. And we need to then therefore acquire those interpersonal skills that we may not have or we may struggle to refine in ourselves, but also teach it to our learners. And so there is quite a bit of attention paid to interprofessional team care, not only at the bedside, but also in the community space. And so we have to recognize this, teach those communication skills, and be comfortable providing that care in a telehealth world. We also know that the changing healthcare needs means a more public-facing information about our health system and the quality metrics that our health systems are graded by. We recently received last week our leapfrog scores of all our hospital safety grades, and and felt celebration and felt some concern for some of our hospital systems. If we are worried about some of our hospital systems, I can bet you that our patients know it as well. So they will be looking at healthcare rankings and ratings of their providers. We all have a Doximity rating of some sort. Some of us even have a Yelp or a Google rating as providers. And if we're worried about that, we need to know that our patients are looking at that as well. So this whole new arena of social medicine, of the way we're being ranked and rated from a quality metrics, from a patient experience metric, has already started in 2016 and will be even more front-facing in 2025. The patients will have healthcare quality data that they will use, but some of that will be delivered inaccurately or maybe misleading. And so it is our job to help our patients understand and evaluate these scores that will be informational and helpful for them. So we need to continue to help not only interpret that information for our patient, but also learn from their patient, provide a perspective on how we can improve. We also then are expected to teach our residents what quality means, how quality metrics are used to grade a program, grade a system, grade a hospital, a unit, and not only teach our trainees to be comfortable understanding that, but also be forward thinking about how to improve those metrics. And then the last, I think, slide I have about changing healthcare needs is really about big data. In 2016, we were already seeing organizations use large data sets to recognize healthcare patterns, but we will see that shaped out even more with the rollout of EPIC throughout the entire Barnabas Health organization. I know that at University Hospital, we have been using EPIC for a long time, and this particular vehicle has been a big data collection arena for looking at population health, recognizing how to standardize care protocols and improve health outcomes. In 2025, the expectation is that all health systems will incorporate data from the electronic health records. We will also then be expected to collect some data from social media, from our patients' wearable devices, from their 23andMe genomic profiles, from whatever biometric data they collect on their Peloton bikes, and then use this in some way to enhance their care and do preventative care. And I know it's a big, tall ask, but we as a healthcare professional really need to be part of the development of this data space in patient care. And so healthcare organizations that are wise and forward thinking will be looking into our learners as the future leaders in how we drive the understanding of data into the delivery of healthcare. Many of us were not taught this. Many of us did not have a computer growing up, and therefore we will be looking to our millennial and iGen learners to really provide that background in technology. Oh, and the last one I wanted to show was how we communicate with our patients using data. Through EPIC, we can talk to our patients, share data with them through MyChart, but we need to know that that information through MyChart is not always complete. Not every single pathology report is uploaded into MyChart for the patients to see, and you can withhold some of your ambulatory notes or your inpatient's notes through and prevent them from being shown to the patients. So we need to know that even though there's good access, it's not complete access. And then we need to recognize that access for one unit may not streamline to an access to another space in another organization that does use MyChart or EPIC. So we have a responsibility, again, to be the drivers of how this is defined for our care space. And we recognize that our millennials will be driving this in order to help us improve care and provide better health data for our populations. The second theme that I really wanted to talk about was how changes in healthcare delivery are affecting healthcare teams. We're very familiar with the physician as the leader of the healthcare team. They oversee everything. They create the order sets. They have healthcare other healthcare providers support in that leadership. But we also recognize that not every physician has leadership skills to lead a large team. Unfortunately, the ACGME expects that the provider becomes even a bigger leader and often a coordinator in the future of a large multidisciplinary team. And therefore, ACGME is expecting that we as teachers really need to develop leadership skills in our learners. The roles in our structure providers will change, not only because the teams will get bigger with a multidisciplinary group of providers, but we will also see the expectation that artificial intelligence in the way we make diagnostic decisions and management decisions will affect the way we run our teams. The ACGME absolutely expects that the technology space will determine the type of teams that we develop in the space that we need it to go. So a stroke team may have a very different profile of providers using stroke data versus a pediatric neonatology team. And so this is such an unclear space for even someone like us that we need to make sure that for regular faculty members who are struggling and at the forefront of teaching learners and providing care, that we provide them with the support as this technology develops. We also have to understand that the way we deliver care, the spaces that we deliver care is different. In 2016, we were starting to see a large group of healthcare facilities become available as urgent care clinics, minute clinics, providing the basic care, vaccinations, urgent ancillary services like phlebotomy, et cetera. But we're going to see that in 2025, more retailers are going to enter the space. As large malls close down, we're seeing these malls repurposed as minute clinics or space that expand into not only regular preventative care, but also some chronic care. We're starting to see dermatologic lasering being done in some of these minute clinics with allied health professionals as providers and the physician as potentially a regional consultant for these minute clinic spaces. We as a healthcare organization may look at this with a little bit of dismay and concern because we recognize.
Who am I speaking with?
We recognize that consumers may be choosing these spaces to have their care delivered, but that care may be suboptimal or not supervised appropriately in the way that we're used to. We also need to recognize that the data collected in these clinical spaces may hinder our continuity of care because that data set, that EHR system that the minute clinics might have, may not incorporate with any other EHR system in our community. So we need to accept that this is here now to stay and learn to work with our providers that are outside the typical healthcare system in an effort not only to improve care, but also
it's starting to interfere with what I'm doing.
To help.
He did tell my husband this because my husband mentioned it to him. And
please make sure to mute yourself, please. We're trying to find, but thank you.
To help our learners understand how to manage this complex system. And then finally, we know about the hierarchy of healthcare. It's usually the physician as the team leader. It's very vertical. It's usually not so flexible. ACGME is absolutely recognizing that the baby boomer retirement will put pressures on the healthcare team and are expecting us to recognize that the healthcare MDDO will be the leader, but there will be many more allied health professionals in that team providing that care. So we as the physician provider need to recognize, embrace, and work closely with our interprofessional providers. We need to learn how to lead that large group of providers, and we need to look for ways to provide that care, not vertically, but potentially asynchronously. And we need to respect and understand, appreciate, and celebrate the unique roles that our large team operation holds, and we need to continue to provide ongoing professional development. I know these are big, tall asks, but I think we can get there as a large healthcare organization. And we also need to know that the way we teach our patients used to be very guided by the physician's expectations, the physician's knowledge base, pathways, maybe some standard processes, and the physician's appreciation of evidence-based practice. And we know that in 2025, this will not only be enhanced, but also complicated by the artificial intelligence and the large data bank that IT will be collecting for us to drive care, to drive algorithms, and to drive adaptation to what a patient needs. So we as a large healthcare organization and sponsoring institution will need to look at what we do to invest in algorithms. Some of us don't even understand what the algorithm's powers can be in terms of improving quality. So we have a responsibility as GME leaders to work closely with our data team and to help build out those algorithms to make sure that they're clinically sound and evidence-based. And we also recognize that in the healthcare system, we will continue to have healthcare financing and disparities pressures. Our healthcare disparities, obviously, we're very familiar with the race, gender, class disparities, but we also have to recognize that there's a group of patients that have affordability issues, have accessibility issues, and geographical issues. When the ACA expansion occurred in New Jersey in 2016, I believe, it increased our ACA population by 33% in the state of New Jersey. But these disparities that I've listed here still remain in some of the more rural areas in New Jersey, especially if mental health disorders are rampant in those communities. In 2025, unfortunately, the ACGME recognized that these disparities will persist and that perhaps telehealth has improved some access to care, but this will continue to be challenging. We also know that retail providers often become unaffordable for patients who don't have the right insurance to seek care in the retail providers who may have easier access for patients in rural spaces. And therefore, we need to respect that and reflect on how to improve that. We need to help patients, therefore, then guide their choices, guide their access to EHR and IT. And we as a sponsoring institution, therefore, have a responsibility to really improve this technology and this teaching for our learners. The third area of evolution in the healthcare system is acute care. The classic model of coming into our ER, being admitted into the inpatient, and then having outpatient model follow-up is something we're all very familiar with. What the ACGME has asked us to recognize is that we need to begin to look at how to move that length of stay and minimize it, add ambulatory-based care models, and assume more responsibility for how we coordinate outside care. And therefore, we as GME teachers need to figure out how to train our residents to recognize the outside traditional model of care that we're not very experienced in, and really build up this longitudinal experience for our residents to understand how to engage in this space and how to provide care in a space that we're currently not familiar with. We also recognize that healthcare mergers began to happen in the 2010 decade and continued to happen throughout the time that the ACGME did their walking tour, and also will take over probably in 2025. We know that current trends are of mergers and consolidation happen locally, regionally, and nationally. However, we recognize that education continues to live at the local level and often with the oversight of just the medical education, the School of Medicine team. In 2025, ACGME recognizes that no longer can the consortiums ignore the need for support of the medical education enterprise, and as large hospital organizations combine and merge, that the responsibility of taking on the ownership of education needs to sit with the sponsoring institution and the healthcare corporations in these large mergers. And Rutgers Health is a classic example of this. We, however, as a GME and a UME team, need to show our partners, our corporate partners, that there's a large return on investment for supporting medical education, and that the investment made will pay off in the future. We also have to spend a little bit of time talking about how the electronic health system will improve the way we aggregate data for population health. We know we began doing this in 2016, recognizing what population health means, what we need to understand about it for preventative health, and what we need to teach our graduating residents in the expectations of data practice. This will become even more evident in 2025 as we expect our residents to really develop the skills of analyzing data, understanding what the social population health needs are for the city, the region, the state, and the country, and provide ongoing education. A lot of this we were never taught as faculty, and will now need to use data to teach it and improve the space. So a lot of challenges here for us to manage population health, but I think we as a sponsoring institution need to take ownership of this to help our organization achieve these goals. And in the area of commoditization, we started to see this in 2016, that capitated payments were starting to occur, that Medicare was starting to expect that we bundle care. In CMS, there was a whole set of standards for cardiovascular care, hip and joint care that showed a reduction in length of stay and showed a decreased readmission rate. We know that in 2025, the expectation for bundling and commoditizing care will be even more prevalent, and that as a result, some health system organizations might begin to create a boutique care that's more patient-centered and more comprehensive. We know that our public will also be shopping for the best place to get their hip replaced based on these expectations of quality from the bundling of the care. So it's a lot for us, even as faculty, to understand, but now we're expected to teach it, to teach about model payments, about decision makings based on these financial expectations, and then to guide our families in making the right choices and improve the communication. So this is another area that I think we're very vulnerable as a GME community from an education standpoint. Also, then we also have to recognize that we have to talk about cost-efficient care, and this is similar to the slide before. We have some familiarity with what value-based purchasing is, what bundle payments mean, but now we are expected to not only teach it, provide it, but also help our patients navigate through this space. We also have to recognize that we are entering a different phase in our the way our providers look at work-life balance. In the past, self-sacrifice was the hallmark of what made a good physician. We are identified by the fact that we took our personal self-interest as subordinate to the fulfillment of our professional duties as a physician. Now in 2025, especially with the pandemic, we are seeing the generational shifts and expectations in the way our learners look at the workforce. We are seeing career change occur, not only because of a generational shift in expectation, but also because of the pandemic. It's really changed the way people look at providing care and the type of practice they want to be in. We need to then recognize that there's a degree of self-sacrifice versus self relationship and interest that needs to be balanced in any successful arena that we provide care in. And we as healthcare organizations and as GME teachers need to help our learners identify this and find the right fit and balance. There's a great attention now, as we all know, to burnout and well-being, and we as an SI need to ensure that we remain safe, not only as providers, but as teachers in this arena as well. This will be a very big challenge for us in the years to come. We also need to know that the way that physicians are beginning to specialize is now really changing. Trainees often specialize, but these specializations are blurring at the ACGME. We know that you can learn how to do vascular surgery care, both in vascular surgery and IR radiology, and that the areas of crossing paths are starting to really be blurred. ACGME, however, does not provide flexibility in some cases, and they're very slow in moving this space forward. We know that even more subspecialization occur that is not recognized by the ACGME, and I've listed a few of them here below. The ACGME does recognize that new technologies are forcing the way we provide care, merging the way subspecialists work together, and that we need to recognize that and potentially hire and deploy physicians that appreciate that collaborative work between subspecialists. How this shapes GME is yet to be seen in the way ACGME might actually flex and change the way they look at this area. We also know that the way that we develop faculty to be teachers, learners, and providers has classically lived at the School of Medicine, in the divisions, in the departments, and that this mixed community of faculty have been developed well in the School of Medicine. But what we see in 2025 is that with the mergers and corporatization, the ACGME expects that the health system assume an increasing responsibility in faculty development and resident development, and that there's a business interest for the health system to develop the faculty in such a way that they can retain the faculty as leaders. So therefore, we as an SI need to uphold faculty development in these areas that we may previously not have seen as important or as a space that we were familiar with. And in the sixth theme, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about clinical productivity and faculty productivity. We're all struggling with this, about compensation, about the way educational value units are used or recognized versus RVUs. And we know that the teaching effort is often derived from clinical productivity, not dedicated, protected educational time. In 2025, we know that GME is frankly a business decision for health systems, and therefore health systems will need to continue to fund the efforts of teaching. if the state and federal funds are expected to continue. So as a result, some health systems will not be able to afford having GME any longer and may shut down or merge with larger programs. But it is my job and the leaders on the call today to really look at sharing the responsibility of faculty development, resident development with the health system as a return on investment for the organization to really retain faculty, improve healthcare, and innovate. We also need to recognize that as we evolve in the GME learner space, that we need to flex and be mobile when our millennial learners and our iGen learners hit the road. We need to know that they are a tech-aware group with unprecedented skills, living in a rapid technological changing society with 5 platforms turned on at most times, and that in 2025, 3/4 of the workforce will be millennials. So we know that COVID has helped us change the space, and we have begun to develop platforms for distance learning that I believe is here to stay. And if there's anything that came out of COVID that was good, I really believe that the transformation in the way we adapted to teaching long distance has really pushed us to be more ready for this space. We also recognize that the ACGME is beginning to look at the duration of training and to see if this is actually something that we can flex and change. LCME, ACGME, the societies all have expectation of how long a neurosurgeon needs to train for. But the ACGME is beginning to look at competency-based educations with independent learning plans based on the learner's capabilities, maybe without a time frame set to it. We know that with COVID, these limitations have become unknown. We are graduating residents and medical students who had less clinical exposure, less clinical volume in their specialty. So we'll have to keep a close eye on this. Unfortunately, the ACGME felt that the standard times of training would likely remain unchanged, but that there would be more pressures on looking at competencies and outcomes based. They also recognize that there are many UME programs in the country moving to shorten graduations that are potentially linked to a residency program, maybe 3 years of medical school linked to an internal medicine program or family medicine program, as an example. And that the boards may begin to look at outcomes based versus time spent as an internal medicine resident for 36 months. And the recognition that we as a sponsoring institution need to begin to flex and provide framework for this type of change, planning and assessment is already upon us, and therefore creates a great burden for us as med ed leaders to figure out how to measure these metrics and how to assess for this. We also know that GME is classically a block rotation, 13 blocks, 2 blocks in the ICU, et cetera, that incorporate supervision, procedures, clinical time, et cetera. But we also know that sometimes blocks can be challenging with the shift model, with the duty hour potential burden. We know that continuity of care has suffered recently. In 2025, sponsoring institutions are expected to potentially restructure their programs to look at patient care flow, to look at team-based work, and to look at longitudinal assignments. And so I think this is going to be a very new space for us to think outside the box, to maybe eliminate rotations that don't support the priority of the department, the priority of the organization, and to really then begin to tailor education for the future employment of our residents. A couple of organizations are doing this. UCSF, South Dakota have looked at longitudinal ways of training residents and looking at outcomes for that. So more to come on this, because I think it's very unique and new to our space. We also have to recognize the value of other healthcare providers in the space as faculty physicians. Right now, we know that the people that teach GME are usually our MD/DO providers, but we recognize that the scope of teaching needs to extend into all of our allied providers because they are integral in the way we provide care in an interdisciplinary model. We're hoping that the ACGME will begin to accept this and recognize that leaders and teachers come out of the space, not just from MDs and DOs, but potentially from our non-physician professionals. And we need to persuade the ACGME to begin to recognize this particular group of core providers as faculty as well. And then finally, we need to look at, in the evolution of GME, the resources for simulation. Simulation has been hampered often because it's subspecialty specific, it's high cost, it's often procedural, and we often don't share the resources because of geography. We know that COVID forced this upon us. We had to end up teaching clinical care in the simulation space. And in 2025, we need to continue to look for ways to advance our simulation training, promote productivity, efficiency, and safety as well. And another last area of evolution of GME, we know that the way that we look at scholarship for our faculty is the classic way of peer manuscript, grant writing, conference presentation, etc. And we know that ACGME grades us on these expectations of scholarship, and we need to recognize that in 2025, the type of physician scientist needs to change in arenas that really are important also for healthcare delivery in health system science, in educational research. And we as an organization, especially as a medical school, need to recognize the way to promote faculty who do different kinds of research and different kinds of scholarship that is just as important in the GME learning environment. I'm sorry, I know I'm running out of time. I have about 4 slides left. We also need to recognize that GME faculty may no longer be a local group of providers. In the past, the faculty here on the call today would provide the teaching on the floors and in the ambulatory spaces. We saw that in COVID, we began to really do some distance learning, some distance teaching with our new media spaces. And we began to see collaboration across specialties as a result of COVID. GME will need to continue to create this mix of local, regional, and national folks who can teach remotely and can help collaborate on the resources that are few and far between, especially to our subspecialty groups that have few providers, few teachers, and it's also especially to the rural health community. This will become very provocative in my mind as an open source of education for our learners, but also we have to be careful with the proprietary expectations of online educational programs, especially in medicine. And then finally, the last theme is the continuum of medical education and alignment of UME and GME and CME. We know these are the classic phases of education. Sometimes they communicate with each other and sometimes they don't. They have similarities and they have differences. And sometimes they may not even have the same sponsoring institution or the same sets of medical school expectations. And again, the accreditations are by different bodies. We know that the ACGME is asking us to experiment with competency and outcomes-based teaching. We know that they want us to cultivate curricula that spans the entire continuum, and they expect us to continue to work as a school of medicine with our health systems to really align the responsibilities along this educational continuum. They do not, however, expect that the accreditation bodies will look at accreditation together, and that at least in 2025, accreditation will remain separate. We also know that the sponsoring institution model has evolved even during the pandemic. In 2015-16, 15% of our sponsoring institutions were AMCs, and then also the addition of the osteopathic programs into ACGME completed in 2020. The different types of sponsoring institutions that we are familiar with are medical schools and health systems, but there are also consortia and foundations that are considered sponsoring institutions as well. We know that in 2025, the SI will continue to grow into large corporate organization, and therefore we have to be in the know, in the space to make strategic investments in the way we manage care and the way we teach our trainees. So the emerging concerns from GME 2025 is that we need to remain healthcare professionals as healers. We need to consider how to continue and maintain clinical encounters. We need to look at ways to improve bedside interactions with a diminishing workforce that's aging and develop the young workforce to be leaders. And we need to be ready to develop this large workforce into unsupervised practice, especially post-pandemic. We also need to have an expectation of the different types of providers that will be coming into our space and learn to work well in that and create a strong interprofessional model for that. We also need to recognize that we have to be healers in a new IT space that is completely foreign to us, and think about how to prioritize the needs of others in this new IT space when we make decisions that affect patients. But at the end of the day, we need to be patient advocates for patient-centered care, and we need to really look at ways that we can grow as team members. So finally, my 5 take-home points are: this is a complex place and space, and we have a pace that will be fast. We need to look at how we better align our resources, our limited resources as GME leaders, educators, and how we can improve them for our learners. We need to quickly adapt every day to the evolving environment that surrounds us. And we need to look at our trainees as aspirational talents, use them, promote them to become our leaders in the future that will take care of us when we are old and retired. And finally, the recognition that we in GME have an important role with the sponsoring institution and our organization to really make sure that we align with the changing climate to improve healthcare and to improve our learners. So really some things that I won't read out, but the local SI recommendations that I have for us, and also the recommendations that we need to push our ACGME national leaders to recognize that we need to create new space for accreditation expectations and enhance recognition for the education of GME leaders and in the SI space. So I know I'm at time. I apologize. I just had to share so much with all of you, and I'll be happy to take any questions that we have in the last few minutes.
Dr. Huang, thank you. Thanks so much for really a really visionary presentation on where we're going in healthcare, on what we need to be thinking about in training next generations of healthcare providers and physicians. And yeah, I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing dialogue, of course, of how we do this and what the roles are at different levels, at the level of the sponsoring institution, at the system level, levels of the schools, levels of the department, how we bring the correct resources and the correct faculty to our learners. And so I'm one is inspired. I'm inspired by the challenge of this opportunity, so that we are the leading edge of education for the future in healthcare. So, I just wanted to say thank you for this great talk. I don't know if you want to make any comment about any of that. We are at times, so we have to have you back and really talk about this and think about what we can do. On the ground, so to speak, in the direct programs to affect these and ensure that we're really creating the next generation for healthcare.
Thank you for that, Dr. Koppels. I think we have great learners. They are smart. They're way smarter than most of us, I think, especially in the arena of recognizing the value and the tool of data. And the way to use that data to be creative and to be forward thinking. So I think we need to tap into that energy of our young faculty and our learners to really help us drive the way that the world is expecting us to process that data to improve healthcare. The way we use certain things that we take for granted to really think outside the box. For example, how we look at visual fields for someone with glaucoma and use that to diagnose, neuroscience, neurological disorders. That's what our learners are creative with, and me as an old person, failed to think outside the box. So I think looking and promoting our learners' creativity is really one way to energize them, to incorporate their ideas and to really retain them as providers that can really make a difference. We need to train up 10% of our people as leaders, not only as leaders in the C-suite, but also leaders in the IT space. I feel that that's very vulnerable because most of us went to college and did biochemistry, not computer science. So maybe when we're starting to recruit for our medical students, that we're looking for medical students that come from a background that can do that. It'll take time, but I think our learners are probably the most neuroplastic to be able to push that forward. And then we need resources. We cannot do most of this without resources from the medical school, from the health system. And so my hope is to really persuade the health system that we can't move forward without investment. And it's to their benefit. It's to the health system's benefit to make that investment for us, with us.
Well, Dr. Huang, thanks again very much. Thank you for your leadership that you have provided, and welcome to the anniversary. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
You've already, it feels longer because you've made such great impacts already in this time, and bringing these kind of ideas forward to provide the goalposts for us to aspire to, I think is extraordinarily valuable. I want to thank you for that, and important for all of us, certainly. So I'll just say we look forward to having you back. Obviously, lots more to do and talk about. And I want to thank everybody who joined this morning. I'm sure you found this extremely educational, as did I, and want to wish everybody a great rest of the day. So thanks again, Dr. Huang, for wonderful discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.